Hello again. Welcome back to the Break the Twitch podcast, all about minimizing distractions and doing more of what matters through minimalism, habits, and creativity. I'm your host, Anthony Ongaro. In this episode, number 23, I sit down with Julie Kearns, the founder of social enterprise Junket, Tossed and Found, and an advocate for environmentally ethical commerce strategies and conscious consumption. This is a longer episode because we cover a lot of ground in it. Some of the topics include how to best handle the things you're ready to declutter, how to minimize waste and your environmental impact, the dark side of donating, as well as information on downsizing, upcycling, consent, and the narcissism of stuff. This episode with Julie will get you in the sustainability spirit and help you consume more consciously going forward. If you're looking to declutter your home, build a meditation habit, or reignite your creativity, we have an audio course for that. The price will be going up next month for new signups, but right now you can lock in unlimited access to the entire course library in the Break the Twitch member community for just $9 per month. Each audio course walks you through a small daily step over the course of 21 days that will help you reach your goal. New members get a 20-minute coaching and welcome call to help you get started too. All you have to do is go to breakthetwitch.com/community to find out more and get immediate access to everything we offer. But for now, let's go ahead and start the show. Julie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thrilled
Good
to
to
have
be
you
here.
here.
Looking forward to talking today.
Where was some of the starting themes of your interest in sustainability and reusability?
I fell in kind of by accident. Grew up thrifting. Dollars were tight in a household with 5 kids and a single income, blue-collar income. And so I had always been a fan of Goodwill shopping and, being able to find fashion that didn't break the pocketbook off, when I was babysitting, et cetera. Continued to enjoy the hunt, the thrill of the hunt, the finding special different things. I appreciated the offbeat nature of that. And because of that upbringing, I hadn't really been all that engaged in consumer culture. Just wasn't a big mall shopper, didn't do a ton of those things. And then when I met my daughter's father, he was more mainstream, and I found myself doing more things. I think I lost part of who I was through that, and so became more acculturated to going and shopping and buying the things at the mall, and it was just part of what we did, and had a consumption lifestyle that it felt like the thing I was supposed to do at the time. Life took kind of a double income, no kids lifestyle, and then after that was a little one came into the picture. And that changes how you think about things, right? Changes your perspectives and priorities. But something else happened right about the same time that shifted things even more for me. And that was right after she was born, my marriage ended. I hadn't seen it coming. And so between postpartum depression and the divorce diet, which is typically good for 30 pounds anyway, I wound up losing 50 pounds.
Wow.
And half the household income was gone. And I had this tiny little 3-month-old female who was going to be looking up to me and the example that I set. And that was a pretty powerful motivator. But the weight loss was a different problem. And I didn't have money to buy new clothes. I needed to continue my corporate office job. Oh. And so I went back to my thrifting roots. And the Goodwill outlet sells clothes by the pound. It's the waste stream where the things that don't get sold at a Goodwill store go. And I was a little girl, size 12, and I didn't need to try that clothes on. And so, khaki pants, Gap Kids, and T-shirts and whatever. And I was just trying to get through, right? Trying to get through the job that, my corporate management job, and getting my daughter to daycare in the mornings, and trying to figure out this, all of the dreams were gone, right? But one dream actually had come back, and I didn't realize it. I had long wanted to be self-employed. And I had long wanted to be a parent that could put their child's needs first. And it didn't really click to me as being anywhere heading in that direction remotely until as I was continuing to consign my old clothes and then starting to heal some of that new clothes that I had bought, or secondhand new clothes that I had bought at the thrift store, made its way into my consignment racks and then made its way onto the consignment floor. And one day at the consignment store, I picked up a check and there was an itemized list there of what I had made money from. And one of those things was a size 12 t-shirt. And t-shirts weigh, what, half a pound? Maybe. And so I'd paid maybe 50 cents for that t-shirt. And the consignment shop had sold it for 10.
Wow.
Yeah. And not only had they sold it for 10, but that meant that I got 5. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I'm going to make money and trying to figure out how I'm going to do that when I'm already working 40 to 50 hours a week and taking care of a little one, And I was just like, that's kind of chump change, but it's 900% ROI. And I was just like, could this be that thing? Could this be the shift that takes me out of this traumatic experience? Could it be something that I could scale? Could it be, because I can take some risk. I can be wrong and test this thing. And could I turn that into an income stream that allows me to be someone who puts my daughter first and allows me to leave a corporate lifestyle behind? And it turns out I could. So it took about a year and a half to scale it to the point where I was able to, I was starting to list things online. I was running all sorts of things around to consignment stores. I'd figured out which stores took what. I was making a point to learn from people what they needed, right? So how can I help you? And the win-win, and looking for that. And I bought a house in the neighborhood. Around the time I still had my corporate job, got things taken care of, and bought a house that was big enough to do Airbnb and that had a dry basement so I could continue to grow this business that I had started in my own space. And that's relevant because it comes back later. I bought it for another reason too, which was I want to be able to downsize intentionally into something much smaller later. And so if I buy this now and the market comes back, I should be able to, maybe buy a house or home outright and still salvage a different dream that I had previously. So a year after I had started doing this thing, I was 6 months into the house. I was figuring it out. It was good. And basically, I walked into work one day. I'd already decided I wanted to be gone in about 6 months, but I wanted to save capital to get there. And the company announced that they had layoffs pending. And they were going to be announcing the following week. I don't know who does this, right? But this company was going to be announcing layoffs the following week. They weren't taking volunteers. But they just wanted to let people know that this was going to happen. It was the first layoffs that the organization had, and it was anyway. So I was like, I want to leave anyway. My employees are in different life stages. They're buying houses, having babies, getting married, and they're making a lot less than I am. And this would be a traumatic shift for them, whereas I'm ready. And so I kind of walked into my boss's office and I'm like, I am not telling you I want to leave. I am not volunteering. I would be happy to continue staying. But if my name is on that list and you're struggling with the decision, I can make it easier for you. A week later, he came and grabbed me. We hugged it out in the HR room and I was off on my way. The reason I share it and I share as much of that is that I got what I thought I wanted, being self-employed, right? And 6 months in, after spending those 6 months pretty much in my basement listing things on eBay, I was really struggling with them. I'd found the way to make the money, but there were no systems to it, right? It was one-offs. It was individual listings of this piece of clothing that you had to measure and take down 6 things and get the good pictures and the shipping and the fulfillment and all of the things, and it was. It didn't give me it wasn't a good soul fit. And I remember sitting on the floor in my basement, surrounded by stuff and thinking, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, I got what I thought I wanted, but I don't know if it's going to work. One of the things that was ringing in my ears was a conversation I had with one of my uncles at Christmas, right? We had family gathering, and and they know that I'm doing eBay for business, and he comes up and he's got his whiskey and he's like, yeah, I love eBay. He's like, I just order like a bunch of comic books, coloring books from China, and I list it once and I just ship it. And I'm so back to sitting on the floor in the basement. I'm like, oh, it would be so much easier if. But my ethics and my integrity prevent me from being part of a problem that I had seen in the waste flow at the Goodwill outlet, where there was so much. And I knew, as I thought about my daughter and her future in that moment, and that was the piece that it so clicked. I knew that if I decided to make it easier on myself and did the comic book thing or the anything new thing, just to make ends meet, that I would be doing her a disservice. And I had this vision of like being asked at some point down the road in the future, on my deathbed, you name it, right? What did you do? How did you contribute? And I realized that if I could find value in the work that I was doing, and there was value, if I could create that, then it was worth doing, and I could be happy with that, and I could toil in the basement because if there was purpose, it was worth doing. And so that's where Junkets, where the brand and the vision came from. It was, you know what, hey, if we can reduce demand for new manufacturing, there's value there. There obviously needs to be some sort of scale solution there. So I'm going to need to figure that out. So I knew that there would be barriers, but I also knew that I would be willing to allow this thing, whatever it was and whatever it was becoming, to grow for as long as it was helpful to people. It was really interesting because I think most people came to know Junket as a retail location, right? A place to shop for secondhand funky things and creative supplies and all those things. But for me, it wasn't necessarily about retail. It was about social change and about healing this bigger, broader societal thing.
Yeah.
So.
Something that stood out to me is you said the whole supposed to do track.
Right.
Right. And bucking that. Was there anything in particular that helped you see what was happening around the supposed to do's that helped you break out of it?
Yeah. Well, quite honestly, the supposed to was I got married, and I got married for good. I was committed to the marriage. I was committed to the relationship. And so the supposed to was you get married, you raise your family, you do your thing. And it wasn't working out exactly like I had hoped to, because I had negotiated to be a stay-at-home mom, and that had not worked out, right? I mean, and yet, so I thought I knew what was going to happen. And the end of my marriage, combined with the little one, really just, it shattered every single notion of what life was supposed to be. And it was traumatic. But it also led to so much healing. It ultimately actually was finding that the potential and the spark and that eureka in the business idea that shifted that for me. But it also required a certain willingness to acknowledge that was a scavenging role, and that was that there would be cultural eyebrow raising about it. And so for me, part of it was really seeing the benefit, and I'm making this choice with intention, and because I'm making that, I think I can help other people see this differently.
Mm-hmm. The house situation too, I find very interesting, that you intentionally ended up in a place that you saw a vision for to deploy as, okay, I can do this here, I can do that here. Yeah. How did that intentional choice lead you to the next step?
I've always had a thing for real estate. I've been licensed as an agent in the past, and bought my first place downtown before the condo boom in 1999. Bought my second place in 2001 and became a landlord at that time as well, moved out of the one into the next, and saw how assets could appreciate far more quickly in some cases than I could make money at my job. And so I learned a pretty early lesson about the value of making wise purchasing choices, right? Because it's not necessarily how much you sell it for. It's the wise investment on the front end. I'd owned 3 different condos on the same corner by the time Meridel was born, and so had been landlording, et cetera, but understood how assets could be used to create passive income. Sure. But one of the things that had happened is that the end of my marriage and the birth of my daughter took place at the same time as literally end of 2008. The market bottomed out, real estate tanked, everything was underwater, and so I had properties downtown that I couldn't let go of, even as this marriage was ending and we were going through all this stuff. So I rented for a year and just was kind of and during the renting is when the selling of stuff had started. Okay. And I knew that as soon as the divorce was over, I needed to restabilize. And by the time the divorce was over, I knew that I was running this business. I knew that the market was still really crappy. So prices were really low. But I also knew that that wouldn't always be the case. And in my prior life, I had loved, well before Airbnb showed up, I loved finding odd, out-of-the-way places. So, and Meredith's dad and I had traveled a fair amount and had stayed at B&Bs, and it was like, I would love to do that sometime. Yeah, I think bedandbreakfast.com and whatever, Verbo, I was finding all of them, and like that was just one of my fascinating things. So I knew what real estate could do for me, and I knew what I wanted to accomplish with it. And I also knew that I was going to want multiple revenue streams. I didn't want to put all of my eggs in one basket, if I left corporate. And that kind of goes against conventional wisdom in some regards. But I was looking at Airbnb being passive income. I actually did pick up my real estate license about 6 months before, or 6 months into the self-employment piece of things, and that was helpful. And then the dry basement for the clothing processing, I knew that it was an asset I could leverage in the short term, and that I could be patient with kind of a weird real estate trifecta thing going on until the market came back. And the reason that matters is that 3 years ago, I actually, over the course of the last few years, we have sold off the condos downtown, but we sold one of the condos and I sold my house and turned the returns on those into an investment where I own my home outright now. And awesome. And the strategic shift there was I moved then once I launched the shop, I no longer needed all of this space. Once the shop was running, I no longer needed to do Airbnb. And so the 3-bedroom house was not a good fit for my daughter and I. And so again, as the market came back, we made a very intentional decision to move into a 2-bedroom cooperative. And one of the things that I value so much about that coming together is I knew what I wanted. I knew I wanted small space. I knew I wanted simplicity. I lived in condos downtown for over a decade, and I knew that was a life that worked well for me. So did all of the digging in the neighborhood, found something that worked, and actually found someone willing to sell because it wasn't on the market, and negotiated a deal where she actually got exactly what she wanted and I got exactly what I wanted. And so my house is 1/3 of the size of what the greenhouse was. I'm about 800 square feet. I don't have room for a ton of stuff. I can clean it up in one fell swoop if I've got the energy to do so, or if I decide that I'm going to put my mind to it. And Meredith has a grandma and an uncle, pseudo, upstairs. We've got a grandpa next door. We have this just lovely little community in the building that we've landed in. So
I wanted to ask, so you said it was a co-op.
Correct.
And so then you mentioned the family members close by. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about the broader structure of that? Is it sort of a bigger building that has different units? What is a co-op exactly?
It's a fourplex. They're kind of rare. If you think about, like, New York has got a lot of cooperative buildings, right? So it's similar to a condo, but the legal structure is different. And so when I say a grandpa, it's a neighbor, right? Art has lived in the building off and on since he was 12 in 1948. And Bev and Dave live upstairs, and they have become family, right?
Got it.
And so they're not blood relatives. They're just lovely humans, and we're so lucky to be able to share space. So what it means is that I am a part owner in that building. And then the unit is mine, but it's the ownership is a corporate structure as opposed to having like a unit ownership. It's again legal, but it also really encourages like the cohesion in the building, a lot of cooperative decision making. So if you think about other cooperative entities and organizations, it's really nice to be both accountable and able to benefit. Right? I like that. Like we had dinner last night upstairs, and it's nothing formal. It's basically a fourplex, but you can make it what you want it to be too.
Yeah. I've heard of co-ops living situations in that some of the responsibilities are shared too, some of the joint decision making. Is that the case?
Yeah,
sort of that sort
absolutely. Yep. So yeah, I mean, I'll go home today and finish shoveling a bit of the snow that I probably should have taken care of late last night. But yeah, right. So we just and other people take care of other things.
I want to go back a little bit just to the business transition as we move our way forward from doing the eBay selling to opening a storefront.
Yes.
Junket.
Yes.
What was that like, and what were some of the learnings that you went from this one situation to where there were obviously issues of scalability, et cetera, to a storefront?
Well, what's funny is that that at the time was the least risky option, which is kind of crazy. But what I had, I'd heard, I'd always read, sign on for real estate as late as you possibly can, right? Because, when you're starting something new, do as much as you can until you bust out of the seams, and like that actually not having real estate is the thing that holds you back. I had been selling stuff online. I'd been hosting my people, right? Like had people coming in from all over the world and loved hosting and enjoyed, right? I called it a be no be. So I was gonna make people breakfast, right? But it got to the point where I had so much stuff, right? So, and treasures that were accumulating, and things that weren't a good fit for eBay, but they were valuable things. They were things that I was picking and finding in the waste stream that weren't the things that I would list, but didn't deserve to get thrown away. So I started keeping those, and I had this mid-century lowboy with 9 drawers, and one drawer had all of the candle holders, and one drawer had all of the other things, and the wallets were in this one, and so just and I was doing the occasional garage sale and all of the things, but it was hard to put everything away when we had guests coming to stay, and because then it was harder to do the work because. You mentioned earlier being visual. I'm very visual. And so if I don't see it, it's gone. So when it's behind the highboy drawer, I don't think about it. So a friend proposed that we do an actual vintage sale at my house. And that was like the summer of 2012. And I was like, yeah, that'd be super fun. We would totally have fun with that. And so we got it started and started putting out some marketing materials. And I would say a week or two after starting to promote it, she's like, I'm 9 weeks pregnant and I don't have the energy to do this. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm doing a vintage sale. And so that was like, I probably wouldn't have pulled it off on my own, but since it was there and it was out there, it was like, well, okay, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do proof of concept. I'm going to put my all into this. And if it works, and if I can drive, I think that I set a $3,000 revenue target for myself. If I can drive $3,000 worth of business to my house in a residential area in a weekend, that will be that will give me the comfort I need to start looking for retail space where I could do that once a month. And so we'll just give it a shot. Made all the signs, got it all set up, put it all out there. Already had a social media following because I'd started that previously. And that had been, something I'd been enjoying. I developed the brand, all those things. I was thinking big, right? The grow as far as you want to. Yeah, we brought in about $300 shy of that target, and I decided that was close enough.
Yeah.
Started kind of, envisioning where I might want to be. I valued not driving. I valued not spending time in a vehicle. I knew that. I had worked and lived downtown for a lot of years and shared a car for a number of years. And so I knew that the work that I was doing, it was going to need to be close. Otherwise, I wasn't going to want to go. And I also knew that from a value standpoint, I wanted to be in community, and community is a value to me. And so started looking around, and sure enough, found a random storefront 4 blocks from my house. And a friend had tipped me off to the fact that it might actually be available. And so sent a message to the dentist who owned the building, and hey, here's my name, here's the thing, here's what I'm thinking. And got a call 2 days later, and he's like, yeah, come on over and check it out. And it was this random little tiny crappy little space, but it held potential, and the price was right. And we, handshake deal, and he handed me a key, and 6 weeks later, Junket was open. So, and the original plan was to just do one sale a weekend. Ease Emporium had just opened about 6 months prior, and she was doing 2 weekends a month. And I knew her casually through garage sales and yada, yada, yada. And so, and she'd been kind of pushing me she's like, you should do something. So I just said, hey, if we market together, what would you think about, would it be cool if I were open the same weekends that you are? And what if we were to invite others to join us, and we could have a corridor because there was the TNT paint shop and the Danco building was somebody was buying there. We knew that. We didn't know who. And it was just like, well, what if we like there would be that's 4 of us, right? I mean, like that could be the beginning of a district. And so and she was like, yeah, that's cool. So opened, never was once a month, was twice a month to begin with, and was a single little storefront. And over the course of that year, we, were like, yeah, you should join us. And by the end of the year, we had 2 more shops open. People would say, yeah, we want to be here. Like we want to open shops. We're like, you should do that here. And, it's like when we collaborate, right, it makes sense. And when we encourage each other, it's win-win, especially in a sustainability-oriented business, right? So vintage is right. It's unique. What's unique? It's you want to go in and wander and actually see some things. And so we encouraged Tony, who now owns Turquoise Vintage, to pop up here. We talked to a couple others who wound up joining us, and then about it, year in, I was like, I'm making a map. I'm just making a map. And so, right. And so like took up, I had my like hack InDesign skills from way back when, and like just put together, and I think I called it Secondhand Row, and we just put a bunch of flyers out, and that was the first mini-mile map, and just kind of went from there.
So it's like it's the Minnehaha Mile, right?
Right.
Because and it's so funny because this is in our neighborhood.
Yep.
Very close to where we live here in Minneapolis, and I'm smiling over here because it's so funny because if Starbucks opened across the street from a local coffee shop, or if a competing coffee shop, I don't know, Caribou opened across the street from Starbucks, they would not be happy about it.
Correct.
And there's just this totally different energy. What I'm hearing is like the underlying motivation of, sure, you need to make money, you need to run a business, but these are things that are being reused and brought back into the...
Correct.
And so there's this shared mission, which brings that kind of thing, which seems like, I know a lot of people talk about the Minnehaha Mile of going to all these awesome vintage stores and checking them out over the weekends, over the, So the energy there is totally different.
By design, right? We referred each other to each other, and hey, you know what? You're looking for X, the best place to go for that is this one. And hey, you're looking for Y? I would try them, or maybe these guys, right? So, and over the course of, the last 5 years, by choosing to position it as a sustainability corridor instead of just vintage, that was deliberate too, in terms of saying, hey, this is, people like us make choices like these. We don't want people who are paying attention to their footprint to have to drive all over looking for something. So ease of access, again, kind of going back to my original, like, let's make it easier. And hey, if we set it up that way, we can actually have a larger coalition too, because we've got AEI they do like green remodeling, and we've got Moon Palace Books, and they've got secondhand books, and they're a really progressive entity. And we've got there were several, and we realized we had like a dozen different businesses that in some way, shape, or form they were sustainable in their own right, in different ways. So that was neat. I think maybe the biggest win and feather in our caps was actually when Habitat for Humanity decided to open a restore on Minnehaha. And attributed our work as why they had made that choice.
Interesting how that influence can start a whole thing. Sometimes I think it's really easy to feel like we can't we're just one person, and we can't really do that much, even when it comes to starting a business, when it comes to starting a thing. But it's interesting, even with Break the Twitch, I've seen similar things where I'll be talking about something and other people will be influenced and want to start their own blogs and different things and start talking about it themselves. And that's just amazing. It really is important to remember that we can influence things much greater than ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's powerful, in fact. So
you mentioned sustainability, and I know that is a big driving factor of what you do and what motivates you to continue on with this mission. Tell me more about what you've learned about sustainability. And I know you're really into the whole idea of the product life cycle.
Yes. Yep.
How has that sort of influenced you, and what have you learned about that throughout your journey of your business?
During the time of running this business, I made a couple strategic decisions that based on how I thought about things. One was to be a for-profit entity. And the reason that I chose to be for-profit, or 2 reasons actually. One was, if we're going to scale this, it needs to be profitable, right? If we're going to get investment, it needs to be profitable. The second reason was that most players in that realm are nonprofits. And so what that means is that they are able to offer tax write-offs to people for donating things. So people feel good about donating the things, right? And they're able to take advantage of, obviously, other bits and pieces. But the risks in that I saw were that we, as people who were donating our things, understood that to be a good thing. I mean, the government's supporting it, right? These organizations are saying, yay, you're doing a good thing. And what we didn't see and what we don't understand is that so much of what we donate becomes waste. And that hit home for me in a way that I don't think it would have otherwise if I hadn't found myself in that waste stream right after the end of my marriage, trying to find clothing that fit and realizing how much gets thrown away. And I think that we've been misled. We are at a point right now where companies tell us that, this new product is green and eco-friendly, and hey, you can help the planet by doing this other thing with this thing. And no one is saying when you donate your things that a lot of it's actually going to get thrown away. We are not taught how to organize our things in such a way that they can have future life. We don't understand that things that already exist are embodied energy, right? When products are made, they are made using limited global resources. And I don't know how many factories are actually solar yet, right? So their fossil fuels are being used in manufacturing these things. And so the faster they get thrown away, the more we've wasted in terms of global resources, et cetera. And so it struck me that by choosing to be a for-profit entity, I could have these conversations with people when they came, and because we would receive things. I was not willing to buy things, and not because I was cheap, but because there was so much out there that there was no need to. And so by focusing on wanting to help people who wanted to be good stewards to their things and not throw them away, by focusing on things that might have gotten thrown away at a Goodwill because there was maybe a little bit of damage, but it was like these beautiful old pieces that had character and patina, right? By choosing to focus on the integrity of the pieces and the history, we could have conversations about why that mattered. And so people came to value us for being able to keep grandma's this out of the trash. Some of the other conversations was, no, we won't give you a tax write-off, though, either, because we understand what happens. We want to be able to be honest with you about the likelihood that things will stay out of the trash, et cetera. And I guess the reason that I mention that is that over the course of 5 years, we became well known for being willing to take things. We became a destination in that regard. But I also encountered so many different understanding levels, both in terms of how we responsibly get rid of things and how we responsibly accept things, right? And it got to the point where we realized that people think they're doing a good thing when they drop things off, and some have a better understanding of that than others. But I came to be, especially as Me Too, the Me Too, hashtag Me Too took off, really started to become clear on the notion of consent and the notion of consent when it comes to an exchange of goods or materials or content, right? Do you agree to receive this thing? Do you, right? Is that gift actually useful to you, right? In our case, we started putting signs up that said, leaving things outside of our building is BS, right? Please don't. And then
were people doing that?
We would come in and find a broken dresser. And it was, maybe it was a 1950s dresser, but yeah, broken. And by the time, it'd been there overnight, waterlogged. And so we were really on the receiving end of so much garbage, despite our efforts to educate, despite our efforts to help people understand. And yeah, it happened regularly. And sometimes they were sweet little treasures and people were spot on. But a lot of other times, waterlogged upholstery, not, right? It felt like sometimes it started feeling like an assault over years, right? And it was just like, we need to do something about this. And so I spent about 45 minutes one morning after walking in to find like all of these piles of books just sitting outside our door. And I'm like, okay, we got to do this. And I kind of put together this manifesto, right? And it's just like, hey, where I landed was that, we are responsible for the full life cycle of our things, right? Of the things we allow into our lives. And it really does come down to agency. The exchange of goods is about communication, right? About offering and receiving, right? It's a two-way. And it's got to be two-way. I mean, if you think about, you guys don't have kids, but I think about all of my friends who who talk about a mother-in-law who just buys all this plastic crap for Christmas, and they've been like, please don't, can you please stop buying? And the grandparents don't get it. They're like, why? What's the harm? What's the whatever? It's about consent.
Consent.
Right?
Consent.
It's become really clear that matters across so many of the pieces of our lives, right? Being responsible for the full life cycle means understanding where it's coming from. If you buy it new, have you like internalized the fact that you're taking responsibility for having created demand for something that is going to be produced using fossil fuels, that is going to be produced potentially using, child labor, that is going to be produced, right? That you're, by creating that demand, there's ownership there, right? And then during the use phase, are you taking responsibility for that? And then when you decide that you're done, what happens then? We're responsible for the outcome or the end game for that thing that we decide to let go. And so I think about the Min's game, and I think it's so healing to be thoughtful about the things that we allow in and the things that we allow out. I think there's a pretty radical shift to say, okay, so these things I've chosen to let go, now what?
Where do they go from here?
Where do they go from here? In the case of some things, and I think it's one of those things where you have to just kind of it's a reset button. You're like, okay, I've got all this stuff that I've accumulated without knowing or recognizing this accountability shift. So I'm going to have to do some work, right? Or I'm going to have to just be aware of it as I do the work, right? I might still choose to send it to the Goodwill or the whatever. I might still, it might still go in the recycling, but I get to start thinking about where it goes. Is there somewhere that could value it? Could it be useful? And by starting to think about it on the back end, it makes you a more thoughtful consumer on the front end, right? So, hey, that thing it's cute, right? But do I want to deal with trying to find someone to take it later? How long is it going to be useful to me? Am I able to find it, in another situation? Those are the questions, right? So it's just, that has radically shifted my how I engage with things, right? I've been a reuse shopper for a long time. That became even more important to me when I realized that when you buy something that already exists, you don't take responsibility for the upstream emissions. You don't take responsibility for any child labor. What you're doing is you're choosing to take responsibility for the remainder of the life cycle. And there's something that feels really good about that, right? So instead of feeling second class for taking something secondhand or for having it be the thing that you did when you were a kid because your family was poor, it instead becomes something that it's the most ethical decision possible to choose the things that already exist, right? So, and given where things have gone with our production cycles and the manufacturing and the hyper, we definitely have the bespoke handcrafted thing going, but so much is made so cheaply that in a lot of cases, the things that already exist are far higher quality anyway. So that's where I come at it.
The Min's game, as you referred to, or the Minimalist Game is the full name of it, where you get rid of one thing on the first day, two things on the second day. It's a decluttering game.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
For those that may not be familiar. And that was one of the most powerful things for me in terms of reducing incoming stuff as well.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden I had to deal face to face with the things I owned and had brought into my life already.
Yes.
And all of a sudden that stuff became, well, now that I'm looking at it head on and now that I'm dealing with it head on, where is this going to go?
Right.
And so all of a sudden, I'm not perfect, obviously. I still buy stuff.
Of course.
When it comes to gear, different things. But there's a substantial increase in the thought process of, I know how this goes.
Yes.
When I don't need this anymore, or when it becomes excess.
Correct.
Then what? There's more feeling of attachment to the whole deal.
Yeah, you got it. Yep, you got it. Yeah.
So that's just one of the ways I've found. In fact, I have I just did a video that will be out by the time this comes out, but about impulse spending and ways to address different forms of impulse spending and just the intentionality that comes when you start addressing the things you already have and seeing there are 5 options maybe. Donate it is an option. Try to sell it.
Yep.
You can recycle it, which is, again, you have to burn energy to recycle stuff. It's still using energy
you got
again.
Yep.
Or you can trash it. You can give it to a friend maybe that might need it, but other than that,
Right.
that's it.
Yeah.
It's all going to go somewhere.
Yeah. Yep. And our capitalism does not create the supply chains or the systems for reintegration. It just doesn't exist. So
speaking of capitalism, I wanted to mention too, just because you brought that up, I love that it is a for-profit business. A previous podcast guest, Thompson Adarin Comey, is running a healthcare startup, obviously a for-profit, because he thinks and believes that capitalism is currently the best way to actually make substantial change in the market, in the economy, and in the way that we do things. Yeah. And having worked for a nonprofit, Nice Ride, the bike share for 3 years, I was the marketing director there for 3 years, and there was substantial impact created by that system through the nonprofit. But I also saw the difficulty that came with needing to constantly be raising funds for the nonprofit, to constantly be focusing on different elements other than the mission and just the bottom line.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
I applaud that. I think it seems to me like I fully agree with what you're doing with what Thompson has talked about, that we can use our modern structures of capitalism to serve our underlying mission effectively.
Absolutely. I agree. I will also say that right now I believe that to a certain extent we're coming up short. And that we've got much bigger problems that need solutions that may involve patient capital, right? Hey, you know what? It's not going to produce a return in 2 years.
Right.
And if I'm an impact investor and I really am concerned about the impact and not just the ROI, I should be looking at some of these longer term, more complex solutions and investing there. Yeah. And doing it because it's the right thing to do, not because it's going to be a pocketbook thing. So while I operate within the system, I also have, I feel like because I operate within it, I can critique it too, right? So it is a pretty relentless system in that it doesn't matter sometimes how good the idea is. If an audience isn't ready, that can be challenging too. Gosh, but we've got a system and people understand the system. And so when I think about the system, I think about how could Junket, how could we integrate into the existing systems within capitalism, right? How could we perhaps help create runway for retailers when it comes to carbon-informed commerce? Because that's one of the things that we get really good at. I used the shop as basically R&D, right? I wanted to understand what were the human barriers to shopping secondhand, what were the barriers to very specific types of products. But I think the biggest thing that I came to understand was thanks to a friend who, the first time he came through the shop, he was like, "This is awesome." He's like, "You got all of these small things, and it's so well organized, and people have been trying to crack this nut because we know from an environmental standpoint it needs to happen." He's like, "Wow," and it was like, "Yay." And as he walked out and like put the coffee mug down and was on his way out the door, he's like, "So how are you going to measure it?" So he just happened to be a consultant that dealt with carbon emissions and was working with other businesses to help them document and map that. And we decided to go ahead and do that at Junket. And where most organizations, historically, and I would say at this point too, are trying to figure out how to do less bad, right? How do we get our carbon emissions down? Gosh, we don't want to, let's not be honest about this.
It's like the goal is to get to neutral.
Right. And where most organizations are going top down, they're saying, hey, you know what? We've got, Better Futures is a great example. Fabulous organization. They deconstruct houses. And so they said, hey, you know what? If a house is made out of this, and this, and we are able to recapture, 80% of the materials for resale, what does that look like? So they're saying top down. And in my case, I'd been trying to figure out, again, back to that scale question, how do you solve for small things at scale? Paper clips. How could we organize paper clips in such a way that, they could find their way onto an end cap at Target, right? So like scale and mass and volume. And so when I was challenged to measure it, I said, I want to start with paper clips. Let's measure paper clips. Because if we can figure it out for paper clips, we can probably figure it out for a lot of other things. So, through that work, what I found, and through my research, what I learned was that, so paper clips are made out of steel. The EPA has what they call warm factors, which is a list of data that says, hey, if you manufacture a ton of steel cans, here's the carbon dioxide emissions factor. If it's virgin materials, here's the carbon dioxide emissions factor if it's 100% recycled, which we had talked about recycled a little bit earlier, and there's some correlation, some information there. But what I learned was that, so paper clips, we don't really pay a whole lot of attention to them, right? Where do they go?
They're paper clips.
Right, exactly. So they're made out of steel. And according to The Atlantic, Americans buy 11 billion paper clips a year.
11 billion paper clips.
Yes.
With a B.
With a B, right? Every year. Okay? 11 billion paper clips at a half a gram a piece is 5,500 tons of steel manufactured into paper clips every year for Americans. Right?
I'm trying to process these numbers right now.
Right.
5,500
tons of steel. So the other number that becomes large by comparison is the carbon dioxide emissions of new paper clips.
Paperclip production.
Paperclip production emissions every year is, if we were to give the paperclip manufacturers credit for 100% recycled steel, which they do not use, it's still 10,000 tons of carbon dioxide just to make paper clips, right? Virgin steel would be closer to 15,000. And at 15,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions, you could drive your car around the planet almost 1,500 times. Combustible engine.
Yeah.
Right? And so learning that and understanding how small things add up to big impact really that's what brought me back into, oh my gosh, we have to shift our behaviors. We need to understand what that impact is. If a paperclip has that much impact, think of everything else, right?
That's what's troubling me in this moment right now, sitting here, because I'm trying to think of the last time I even thought about a paperclip.
Yeah.
We haven't bought paperclips in a long time, but you buy the pack of them and then they sit in the drawer and you use them over time potentially. Yeah. But it's just so small, and it's fascinating that is such a big... Right. And it makes total sense.
Yeah. It's just the small things multiplied by habits add up quickly, especially when multiplied by 325 million people.
Let's stay on the paper clips for a second and go, okay, so you started with paper clips. Have you come up with a way to organize them or sort them? Like, what can we do about paper clips?
Isn't that good? I have an entire rollout concept for that. And if anybody wants to work with me to like make it happen, I'd be totally down with it. But it's bigger than just me. So for now, when Junket, we closed our retail this last year and moved into a warehouse. I felt like, things never really came back the way I needed them to after 3 years of road construction on Minnehaha, right? So it made sense to move. And when we were given an opportunity to join, actually Better Futures again, to join them and sublease some warehouse space, it was like, you know what? This is the next phase. So there's a receiving dock there. They've got more materials. They've got the larger materials to our smaller materials. And it's like, yeah, this feels like the next step. And so the last 6 months have been about establishing a solid online platform. And that online platform is inherently ethical. We're doing commerce. We're modeling commerce the way it should be. And when I say that, it's from a carbon-informed standpoint. We're saying, hey, you can buy paper clips on our website. And they're secondhand paper clips, which means that you don't take in the emissions, right? But they will also come to you via secondhand packaging, because we are not going to create new packaging, right? One interesting data point, it's analysis that I've run after I saw somebody on Twitter complaining about how Amazon won't publish its carbon footprint. And I tend to get like when I get worked up about something, I'm like, you know what? Let's figure out what we can figure out. And so using publicly available data, I was able to extrapolate that just the cardboard boxes that Amazon ships out, there's about 4.5 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year generated just in the empty boxes.
Just empty boxes.
That's the empty boxes.
Without any of the stuff that's actually getting shipped.
Correct. And that number was something that I ran using conservative, saying, hey, only 10% of them go on an airplane, right? Mm-hmm. That was saying, hey, those boxes, there isn't a single one of those boxes that is larger than 8 inches on any side.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
We gave them credit for conservative shipping. I wanted the numbers to be beyond reproach. And I wanted, like, if the numbers were to get out for people, like for Amazon to be like, oops, we're not going to say anything because we know it's worse, right?
It's worse than that.
And I guess, so the reason that matters is that with our website, we're choosing to use carbon as the baseline for our business decisions and our operating decisions. And that's where capitalism comes in again, is that right now capitalism only focuses on the bottom line financially, and it's not taking concern with the social externalities or the environmental externalities. And those are the pieces that I'm really focused on integrating. So our model and our platform, so it is secondhand packaging. It's also ground shipping only. Because when you put things on planes, the emissions, like on a shipping and transport, it's 10 times the emissions on a plane than on the ground. So and that's just for your audience. It's good to know that, like, if you're shopping Prime, 2-day Prime, the 2-day is actually a bigger problem than a lot of the other pieces in that. If you can be patient and embrace slow shipping and have it come to you on the ground, you're making a better choice, right? So and you're making an even better choice yet if you say, hey, you know what, I'm actually going to find some little guy on eBay or on Etsy and make my purchase from them instead, because of the way that the systems have been set up without regard for emissions. So are we getting uncomfortable again?
Oh,
sorry.
no. Yeah, no. That's this perfectly speaks to the twitch, the break the twitch.
Yeah.
It perfectly speaks to how right now the friction is being removed from all of the major processes that we're involved with on a day-to-day basis.
Correct.
And the fact of the matter is, it takes a little more time to go to eBay and find a seller.
Yep.
It takes a little bit more effort to seek out something that is not in the default, the action we are being programmed to do.
Yes.
And part of all of this is finding a way to take a step back, whether it's with shopping or whether it's with travel or whether it's with any aspect of our lives.
Right.
And observing it and going, okay, this is what's become the path of least resistance by design. But is there a better way to do this that I can be a little more patient for? Because increasingly it just seems like everything in our lives, the most successful organizations in the world are the ones that are able to give us what we want instantly. And that's not going to change, until I'm always reminded of this quote from the book Hooked. Okay. It's a book about designing addictive smartphone applications.
Yes.
So it's from a developer side. And I found it fascinating because I wanted to understand from the Break the Twitch perspective, the other side of how do we deconstruct that.
Yes.
And the quote is, it is more effective to reduce the effort required for the end user to do something than to increase their motivation to do it. We can market all we want to try to increase someone's motivation to buy a thing or to do a thing. But it's even more effective if we can just make it super, super low effort to do.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's a race to the bottom of the barrel.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that. There's no.
Yeah. Well, and it's also a race to. It feeds addictions, and it feeds the cultural narcissism that we have in America, right? In fact, when I think about it, and I just used a word that gets used quite a bit when I say narcissism, right? And typically we think about that as people who are vain or think so much of themselves. But when I look at it from almost a pathological standpoint, we're conditioned to desire. We're conditioned, and I want that thing. I want that thing. I want, the emotional want of that thing. But think about how once you have it, unless you've decided that there's an actual purpose for it, once you've got it, if you're not being intentional about it, the likelihood that you're going to devalue that thing and then discard it, right? That's how we've been trained to consume. And that is, when you think about narcissistic relationships, that's how people who are like narcissistic personality disorder, that's how they engage with other humans.
Yeah, like adore, adoration, and then discard.
Yeah. So and devalue too. Love, 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 right? And just all of the, and then now that possession, now that I have you, you don't mean as much to me. And and in those relationships, a lot of times it's like devalue, and then like, how do I get it gone? Right? Yuck. But think about the American dream. You can have it all. It's not about community, right? So we're so conditioned to want these things and bred to believe that that's what you're supposed to do, that we don't even see it in each other when it's manifesting. We don't understand it. We don't have language to really talk about it. And the language we do have, we use incorrectly, which I just think is fascinating, right? So the flip side is that if you can get off of that hamster wheel, right, and decide that instead of buying things, that you're going to like step back and figure out what's saying, hey, why am I buying this thing? It actually becomes creative problem solving. And I love it because it's just like, oh, hey, I need to go buy this thing. Wait a second. What am I trying to accomplish? Do I have what I need? Could I solve it in a different way? Do I, like, my drain, do I need to go buy the drain thingy, or like could literally a paper clip help me take care, right? I mean, like, so it's, and so in the creativity piece, so many people say that they're not creative, and really it comes down to, we've been taught not to problem solve.
Because there's a one-click solution for everything. There's a specific thing that you can buy that's made out of a long piece of plastic, and you stick it down the drain and pulls the hair out.
Yeah, exactly.
And you use it once a year.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Exactly. You know what? And some of those are really effective, right? But but for every one that's like super effective, there are also like 37 others as seen on TV that may or may not work, and that probably, like, by the time you've used it once, you're like, you gross, and it goes in the garbage, right? I mean, so it's mindset. So and actually, while we're talking about that, because like, think of all of the investment and the energy and the money making that goes into designing those pieces and things, right? Kind of going back to the fact that production and emissions, basically, if a product doesn't have a cord or a motor, close to, if not 100% of the emissions generated during the entire life cycle of that product, like, most of them happen during that production phase. What's worth knowing is that if you're going to launch a business right now, if you want to be a product designer, if you think you're going to go out on a limb and make this thing, and it's going to, you're going to sell, hundreds of them or thousands of them, and you're just going to like have it manufactured in China and put them forward, your business is not future-proofed. Carbon emissions, if they're not built into a new business right now, into like carbon pricing, et cetera, not going to be super successful. So that's just my little nugget of like, when people are like, hey, yeah, I got this idea for this. It's like, okay, well, for the businesses that are running, they should be thinking about what that looks like. And for businesses that are thinking that they're going to start and have this fabulous idea, should really give some serious thought to their long-term goals for the project and incorporate that piece.
It is interesting just looking at the landscape as a whole and seeing the move towards, I think it's called greenwashing.
Yes. Where
new products are in cornstarch packaging and they're biodegradable, which is like, great. I guess it's better than it would be otherwise. But there's still the entire life cycle of that thing, from ideated to designed to the manufacturing plates being set up to make the thing that then gets the thing made, and then gets shipped, and then it's the whole thing is still happening.
Right.
And it's still,
And when it's done, if it's getting recycled or composted, it's still being downcycled, right? A lot of the work that needs to happen right now is we need to radically shift. Circular design is something that's being, it's getting, there's a lot of buzz around circular design, but when I think about what corporations are doing around circular design, it's, hey, I'm going to make this piece that we're going to put into this new computer, and it's a new piece, but it can be used again in a second iteration or third iteration or fourth iteration. And while I laud the fact that it's happening, I'm not sure that, that you can really call it circular if it has to get thrown away once before it goes into a second product, right? When I think about truly circular design, we should be working with the things that already exist and figuring out how to reintegrate them effectively, right? And it's a different mindset, and it's a different approach. And it doesn't involve just quickly making widgets. Or maybe it involves taking things that you can find in volume and creating some sort of manufacturing where you can use the material as is rather than burning it first or chopping it into pieces first or what have you. So, and that's what, for me, that's what reuse is about, is best and highest use of something as it already exists. Recognizing that best and highest use will be different, for different things, right?
It does give me some hope thinking about the limitations of human interaction with technology and things like that, where at a certain point, our eyes cannot see more pixels, right? So a phone getting denser and denser and denser with pixels. The newest phones, for example, the newest iPhones or whatever, the Samsung Galaxies, the pixels are so dense that you literally cannot see them. So there's a certain peak right now that I think where we're hitting with tech, where we're not seeing a massive increase in resolution. We're not seeing it that would matter. That would actually, we don't need a 4K phone because it's so small. We just don't need that many pixels.
Totally.
And our eyes won't even be able to see it.
Right.
So there are certain upward limitations around tech that I think are now affecting Apple. And they're saying, you know, people aren't buying their newest phones as much and they're starting to taper off because the age of that is starting to hit. And I don't know how that's going to affect things long term, but it is interesting to think about that call quality. Everyone's content at this point with how a person sounds pretty much through the earbud. So there's not going to be some big thing.
Correct.
The screen, I think, is limited by our own eye.
Those only get, you know, I'm forgetting what they're called, but like the
ocular receptor,
exactly,
the cones, or
the cones or whatever. I mean, those can only get so closely together too, right? So anyway.
And so all these things, I do think will sort of reach a point where we're seeing already where people. I have an iPhone 6S still.
Me too.
Yes. So I still have my 6S, and I've had no reason to upgrade it. Sure, the camera's better on the new iPhones. The screen is denser, but overall, I already want to use my phone less than I do. And so how would buying a newer, more beautiful, integrated thing help me?
It's funny that you mentioned that because one, it's the social thing, having the thing, right? The early adapters and that's an emotional choice, right? It's not an actual need-based choice. The other thing, to bring it back to paper clips, is that the carbon dioxide emissions factor for steel is 3.06 for virgin steel. The carbon dioxide emissions factor for tech, for electronic devices, is more than 50. Right? So 50 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions for every pound of product that we purchase. If you don't have to buy a new one, that feels good. That's a good, environmentally, that's a really good choice. And if, for example, you were to need a new one, choosing an 8 instead of a 10 is a much better choice because it already exists. So, and so tech can be harder to find secondhand, but tech from buy your stuff wisely and think it through is important.
I really do think with tech that we are reaching a point where battery technology is holding us back in terms of the next major leap. Because that hasn't changed a ton since in the last decade or two, right? There have been some advances, but the things that we have are pretty much getting to be the best that we need for what that is right now in its current form. And there's going to be some other weird, crazy technology that I don't know about yet that will push the next thing forward, I'm sure. But it does give me some hope that at this point, it seems like the tech is getting so good that there's not like software that it can't run at this point or except for the highest of high end, maybe if you're at Disney designing, 3D, you need the best of the best of the best. But other than that, it just about runs everything. So obviously minimalism and decluttering, as I mentioned, have had a big impact on my own process when it comes to consumption and this sort of thing. And right now, tidying up from Marie Kondo is a huge, very popular series on Netflix. And so it's getting more and more attention on top of her. I think she sold like 10 million copies of her book, which is crazy. But how has that influenced, I know there's some tie-in, and how has that influenced what you're doing, and have you adapted that in some way?
I did purchase Marie Kondo's book about 4 years ago, right as I was thinking about downsizing. I'd always had a fairly fluid relationship with things, and obviously once I started the store, if I was done with something, it went to Junket. That was easy, right? I built in the solution, so I didn't have to take the stuff to the Goodwill or Savers or whatever. And using the book and her strategy, I spent about 6 months downsizing and preparing for the move that I eventually took. And what I found was, one, the strategy was really helpful. right? Hey, take all of your books and put them all in the middle of the floor, right? I mean, and she's ruthless. She says, like if you get done with your books and you've gotten rid of your books and you're down to your 30 books, right? And you realize that you forgot 2 boxes of books in the attic, well, clearly they weren't important enough to you, so get them gone. The piece of the book that disturbed me was the references to just throwing it away. I spend just a fair amount of time in my head. And as I was kind of thinking through this, I'm like, how could this be helpful? And what I realized as I got the stuff that I wasn't keeping ready for Junket, I realized that was actually a really good process for organizing not only the things you were going to keep, but for easily organizing the things you were going to pass along. And that if it was easily organized and you had 3 boxes of books instead of like the random whatevers from everywhere, right? Or you cleaned out this room and shoved it all in there or whatever. If it was well organized, it was easier to you could actually find an organization that could benefit from books specifically, right? And so, for example, the Women's Prison Book Project is an organization locally that offers, that they collect books and they get them into the prisons. And they definitely have some things that are not appropriate content, but for the most part, right? Like, weapons building's not going to be okay. But a lot of the content is great. And so it was really cool to realize that her process could be adapted really easily to taking the things at the end of their time with you and ushering them forward in a way that respected the materiality, that respected community and need, and that engaged communication to say, hey, is this helpful? And that was the piece that I do advocate for Marie's process for that reason, is that if you go into the process with intention and knowing that you're not just going to shove it out, if you energetically you say these things have value and I'm going to help them find this new place, it takes that process to a whole new level, almost spiritually, right? Hey, I'm going to help do this. And that feels good, right? This is all I think we've been so conditioned to feel exhausted by our stuff. We have not been taught to manage it. We are really crappy materialists because we accumulate it and we don't organize it, right? So if we can engage differently, right? Take a deep breath and hey, and imagine how these things could do good going out into the world. It makes the process that much more enjoyable, right? And that is the thing that doesn't happen when you send your stuff to a big box necessarily, right? And even when you do, even sending books to the big box, they're going to have a much likelier time of landing on the sales floor if they're organized as books.
Right.
Right. So it really comes down to being a good steward, and then being able to celebrate that rather than feeling like crap about what we know about that system and the fact that it's not working for us right now.
In your experience running the store and with everything what might you recommend? What advice would you give to people broadly or specifically when it comes to this kind of stuff that they should be donating, the things that maybe should not be donated, and just general advice around that?
First is to recognize it's going to take some work because our systems aren't set up to support it. Okay. So second, I think it becomes a political issue where you can ask questions. Third, I have some thoughts on even this is even further upstream, but if the product comes in packaging, it's okay to leave the packaging at the store. Right? So preventing it on the front end. But when it comes to the downstream, do some research, do some Googling, right? In Minneapolis, St. Paul, Junket maintains a list. We have a list online of and we've got it sorted by the things. So books are, can be taken by this organization. Plastic bags are great for listening house. They serve a population that's experiencing homelessness, but they are not an overnight shelter. They're a day service center, and people need things to hold things in. They also they also take socks because they run a sock laundry program, right? Again, so if you can plug into the into local organizations and understand what they need and what they use, that's a good way to do it. I recommend doing that research before you launch your minimalism, your downsizing effort or the Marie Kondoing thing, so that you can figure out who takes what, put the names and the products on the boxes, right? So, hey, I know that Animal Humane Society in Minneapolis, in the Minneapolis area, I know that they take everything from heating pads for the like infant kitties and right
Yeah.
like so right they take the heating pads, they take Ziploc so that they can part out food. They accept carrots and Cheerios because they've got rabbits and birds. They've got all of these different things that they could accept. Cleaning supplies. If you're doing a massive downsize, if you're doing I actually offer a class for boomers like on ethical downsizing, and like if you're doing that, it makes a lot of sense to begin with the end in mind and plan for good results and give yourself the time, right? It might even make sense to partner up with a few friends that have the same mission, right? So, hey, divide and conquer. We know that this organization will take these things. This will take these, but why would we all drive to this place and this place and this place and this place? So I think there's a lot to be said for community building around getting the things to the right place. So, and at Junket, we're working on some, how can we support communities so that these things can come in organized ways? Can we put labeled coffee cans at community centers where people can drop off the paper clips, the rubber bands, the whatever, right? So the things that we know that we want, that it doesn't make sense to drive all over to the way to do whatever. But I think it really does come together with this like social aggregation and building relationships around it and choosing to value the things in the first place. It's not here yet, but I mean, when I think about, what Junket was doing in terms of providing a service and providing that organization and redistribution, that's something that if that existed in community, in other communities, at scale, and people could come together and participate in that way, cooperative ownership or what have you, I think that that's a pretty powerful future-looking solution, but it takes people that want that to make that happen.
None of this stuff is super fast. Unfortunately, the incoming part can often be fast.
Right.
But downsizing, decluttering, all of these things, we have to realize that often we accumulate these things over a decade, over a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's not all going to change instantly. For us, this has been quite a process too. I mean, we're making these big changes right now where, we got rid of stuff out of basically half our house and then even went down from there. And now we're selling like everything because we're selling our house. And this is the first time I've actually talked about that. And so we're selling our house and we're selling everything because for our next move, we want to just have as little as possible so that we can be as flexible as possible.
Yes.
And that's wild, but the different things that we've done slowly has been like the complete opposite direction that we ever expected. It's like, nope, we're less and less and less and less.
Yeah.
And that's allowed us to do so many things that we wouldn't have otherwise. Yes. So it's been just a incredible kind of journey of understanding what we need, what we don't, where things go, where they come from, and all that stuff. So yeah, it takes time. Yeah. It just takes time.
It's a huge process, and likewise, as you're talking through all of those things that you're doing, I mean, I also have made a point to live on bus lines, and for me, in the last 6 months or so, while I had the shop, I really didn't feel like I could go vehicle free because I might need to run and do the thing, or there might be an errand, or there might be whatever. And, and I kind of felt like a TaskRabbit attached to that business model. And since having closed that, I actually used an electrical issue with my vehicle to be an excuse to like slow myself down, or basically disincentivize my, choosing to like go in the car. I'm like, I'm going to have to jump this thing if I'm going to be able to drive it. I rode my bike and a scooter all summer long. And then when I got to fall, I remember hopping into the car one day and just the glass and the metal, it felt like I was in this giant isolating box. And I decided that as fall and winter rolled out and as the two wheels didn't make sense, that I'm like, you know what? I don't want to get back into my vehicle. So I mean, I was already living on the bus line, hadn't really been making use of it, and decided, I'm like, hey, you know what? Let's figure this out. And so the last 3 months, I've mastered it. A couple nights ago, I had to move the vehicle for a snow emergency. And wouldn't you know it, as I'm moving it around the corner, I realized that the axles are busted on this thing. Jeez. And I'm like, oh. And it was in that moment as I'm like, oh, that's a problem. And then realized that I'm like, oh, but wait. I'm like, I had an appointment in the suburbs the next morning, and it struck me that I'd already figured out how to do it on a bus. I already had my plan in place. I wasn't going to drive the vehicle anyway. And that had been one of the reasons that I had been like afraid to let go of it in the first place was like, well, what if I need to get out to the suburbs? And so I'm like, this is it. It's an old vehicle. I called, I found the best junker deal I could find online. And I've got someone coming to pick up that vehicle on Monday. And I think going back to doing the exact opposite of what we expected, right? I think the bigger thing is that we're doing the exact opposite of what our culture expects, right? So when I sold my house and bought the condo or the cooperative unit and paid cash, I got asked questions about did you lose your house? What happened? Are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm more than okay. Like my cost of living just dropped by like thousands, right? And, my car not working. Oh my gosh, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I don't want to drive it. I'm using it as an incentive. And it's going to save me a lot of money to not be driving that, right? And the bigger thing for me on both of those is when it comes to climate adaptation, because that's part of this process. It's a major part of my drive to adapt in this way, is that my emissions are so much lower, both in terms of housing and vehicle.
Totally. You're getting on a bus that is already going on that route.
Right.
It's already there.
Right.
You're just using it.
Exactly. And there are already plans in place to electrify the buses, and I might pick up an electric car at some point, but at this point I've designed a life that doesn't require it. Mm-hmm. And we've got grocery stores between the warehouse and my house, so I can grab food when I choose to, right? I'm working on my diet right now. Mm-hmm. Before we started recording, you said something about how the minimalist community overlaps some, the Venn diagram of minimalism and veganism and sustainability and all those things, how there is so much overlap. Coming at things from a climate lens, when it comes to plant-based eating, has been a really interesting case study for me. There's this sense that people who go vegan or who identify as vegan are militant or are, right? I mean, there's a lot of connection to that. Yeah. It seems to me there's also a lot of perfection in that, right? Because my gosh, if you eat butter, you're not vegan, right? Right? And so a lot of it has to do with our language, our judgment, our expectations of ourselves and each other. And so as I've been on a journey to reduce my meat intake, to reduce my dairy intake, to incorporate more, more of the plant-based foods. And I will tell you that I have found like a beefless taco crumble that is just like, oh my gosh, better than the real thing. It's like, I mean, it has become this really fun journey of adaptation, of finding new things to like, right? Building new habits, but also being okay with imperfection, right? We don't have to be perfect. I can have butter on my toast in the morning, but use plant-based for my baking, and I'm never going to know the difference. I can try these things. I can try new kinds of, plant-based milks. And it doesn't mean I can't drink dairy, but what would happen if oh my gosh, I love the blueberry lavender almond milk at Trader Joe's? So good. And I'm making my own oat milk from time to time, right? I mean, cool. It turns into creativity. Yeah. And it's not about loss. It's about discovery.
And exploration.
Yeah. And creativity and getting excited about change, because right now I think the biggest thing that we're dealing with when it comes to climate adaptation is fear.
Yeah. Much of it is fear of loss, of change.
Yep.
I love what you're hitting on here, because to me, this has been my entire experience with my whole position of this break the twitch thing. Everything is that if we show and expect and create something that is this ideal of minimalism, perfection, and we have everything, it's like, where do you charge your phone? Like, where's the phone charger? Or
exactly.
Where's your food? Like, I don't see any food in here. I see a lot of influence of yes, it's beautiful. I love your floor to ceiling windows. It's lovely.
Gorgeous.
But it prevents people from trying it. Yeah. And it prevents, it's like this weird gatekeeping thing. And I see that in food. I see that in minimalism. I see that in intentionality and zero waste. Yes. Some of my favorite zero waste people are doing it in a way that is like, I'm not perfect. this happened today, and they handed me a straw with my thing, and I forgot to say I didn't want one, and this happens, but I'm doing my best and talking about ways to do that. It's so great.
Yes.
And the Girl Gone Green is a friend of mine who does a lot of this stuff, and it just we need to take a more sustainable approach to making these changes, or else it's not going to work. We know this with diets. We know this with exercise. We know this with habits, that when we go and expect perfection of ourselves, when it goes wrong, it just, well.
It's discouraging.
Yeah. So I love that. I love the idea of integrating exploration and changes in ways, finding things you love. And you're still, at the end of the day, consuming less meat. At the end of the day, you're still consuming less dairy.
Yep.
And it's still having the desired outcome.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't miss it, right? I because I'm not saying I can't have it. I don't like it's like dieting, right? Like if you inhibit yourself from, or you say no, that absolutism gets in your way.
Yeah.
Right. And I think self-compassion and embracing the things that aren't perfect is one of the things that we need the most right now.
Yet we obsess with following perfection, perceived perfection. The fitness athletes, the bodybuilding and like powerlifting accounts that I follow on Instagram are like, to me, probably not achievable with what I'm willing to do in my day-to-day life.
Exactly.
Yet I see that as, the goal. And with minimalism, with design, does everything have to be like Kinfolk magazine, this perfect design and everything? It's like, why do we obsess over this?
Right. Yeah. I right. I think it's a really good question. And I think what's interesting for me is to think on this and to reflect on the imperfection is the goods that I started out with and how things that are imperfect, because I really set out with Junket to see if there was a market for like the doilies that were gorgeous and people that, someone's grandma had spent hours making, but it might have a small tear in it. And I'm like, there's got to be a market for that. The artists, the people must want these things. And they did, right? But it also that was such a powerful thing for me because having been abandoned in my marriage, it became about reclamation. It became about finding value. It became, right? And creating new possibility. And there was so much metaphor in the things that we were ushering forward and in how I was turning my life around, that I would say that is one of the most powerful things. And it allowed me to accept imperfection in myself, in others. It allowed me to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to show up and I'm going to be my best every day, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's got to be enough, right? The people in my life are going to love me the way that I am, or maybe they won't be the people in my life anymore, right? Radical acceptance. And of course, I need to show up that way too. So yes, I think that those picture perfect bodyguards and the all of the perfect is a direct reflection of our consumer culture and the fact that everything is manufactured and shiny, right? And everything is perfect and it's lined up on the shelf just like that. And you can get the one that's exactly the same as that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. And as soon as it's got a crack, it's not good anymore.
Yeah.
And you got to throw it. I mean, it's the message, right? And it's such a pervasive message. It's about getting comfortable with yourself, and we are not taught to do that either.
Mm-hmm.
So,
getting comfortable with yourself, yeah. A big part of this for me too has been learning to let go of who I am based on this, my shirt or the thing on my shirt.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that because it says one thing versus a different thing, it's worth $1,000 versus 10.
Yeah.
Just because it says something different.
Right.
Or a different company put their thing on it.
Right.
It's kind of wild. And learning to find confidence in myself outside of in myself.
Yeah.
Outside of myself.
Right.
Learning to find it in just here instead of with the things that surround me has been a weird, oddly vulnerable journey of letting go of this stuff.
Yeah. Isn't it? What? Yeah.
And,
well, what are people going to think of you?
Yeah.
Right. Well, guess what? Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
But that's a lesson we have to learn over and over and over again with regard to all sorts of things too. So, but but yeah, and still, I mean, still the things that you choose to surround yourself with do say something, right? And what does that look like? And what is that message? But ultimately, you want that message to be a reflection of your values.
Yeah.
I think that that's a huge opportunity for us to think about how brands have conditioned us in like a narcissistic relationship, right? Where we want to attach ourselves to that brand, where we don't feel good about ourselves if we don't have that brand, right? Or if we have a lesser brand, they are playing off of ego. They're playing off of shame. My take is that those are abusive relationships. They're extractive relationships. They are not making you feel better about the choices that you're making. They're making you feel inadequate unless you make their choices. I just think that that's something that when we reject it and call bullshit, I think there's a lot of power in that.
Is there a way to step into that?
Recognizing that we're in a system, right? Like understand the system. See, step back and pay attention, observe, see what's going on, like understand the politics, understand this, the financial piece of this. This is about extracting wealth, right? Understand that. But I think that, it's kind of like waking up in the Matrix, quite honestly, right? Where Keanu busts out of the jelly pod thing and he's like, and it's like all of a sudden it's like it actually is a very different world than we've been conditioned and lulled into, right? We grow up in it's the deconstruction. And it's all about process, right? So life is about process. And so as you're on your process and making the shifts, and I'm on my process and making the shifts, giving ourselves permission to be imperfect and to like what we like and to choose what we choose is just incredibly empowering. I don't know how people can break out of it without, in my case, I had traumatic experiences that led to that, right? Upsides of trauma. And so I wouldn't say, go chasing trauma, but I would say, if and as you're experiencing trauma or as you're going through something difficult, look for the gift, right? I used to work with a woman who just wonderful boss, and she would we'd sit in her office to be like, where's the fucking gift? I need the fucking gift. And right? And I was just like, yeah.
I love that.
Isn't that good? Right?
You can make a poster.
Right. And so, and quite honestly, the poster making, I mean, with Junket, some of the products that we sell, the most popular ones are, quotations that are printed on book pages. And it actually, those, for me, were about finding the messages that helped me cope. And quite honestly, namaste motherfucker was one of our most popular sayings. And that came straight out of divorce coping, right? Where it was the thing that I could grit my teeth and Argh! And it was so helpful to have a mantra to cling to to get through that. I was like, as that business started, I'm like, someday I want to share that with others. And it's been so neat to have that filter in, right? But yeah, where's the fucking gift?
Yes.
And seeking it and pursuing it and looking for it allows it to present itself.
Being open to it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, that's a whole other thing that,
yeah,
just the mindset around seeing all the bad, you can see all the bad things that happen,
right,
and there can be all these other things happening, and you're just, if you're not looking for them,
right,
they just...
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. You got to look for it for sure.
Well, shall we do a question from the bowl?
Sure. Let's do a question from the bowl.
Right,
is that the bowl over
there?
there?
If you don't mind grabbing it.
I will get the vessel.
Right,
Looking at who you were 5 years ago, how would that version of you react if they saw you now?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good one.
It is a good one. So YouTube viewer cast 9 of 47.
Okay.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. So the shop would have been a little over a year old. I would have just expanded to bring in a bunch of vendors. It was chaotic. It was before the road construction, but we weren't doing anything with the carbon dioxide emissions and nothing of that sort. And so I think if they saw me now and saw the work and the way that this has panned out to build social response to climate change, to have the expertise that I have now and the way I've been able to incorporate that and integrate some of that growing up history and some of the political things that are happening right now, and to be able to help people heal their relationships towards stuff, and to be moving into a role where I'm speaking and consulting and all of those good things. I think she'd probably be like, dang, how'd that happen? Because you're running a store right now, right? But I think she would feel like the work that went into digging in the basement and sorting out all of the beads and the paper clips and all of the work that she knew would be work is panning out. Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's a great answer. That's a great question.
It is. I agree.
Yeah. Julie, where can people find you online and what you're doing?
Online at shopjunket.com/Julie. You'll get to booking for consulting and classes and things like that. On social media, you can find the business at Shop Junket, so it's Junket. Personally, I'm running around on Twitter and talking about climate and things like that at Julie Junket, and likewise on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
well,
sure.
It's been a pleasure talking with you through all of this, and thank you so much for sharing your experience and everything with the podcast here.
Thanks for the opportunity, Anthony. Appreciate it.
All right. And that concludes my conversation with Julie. If you enjoyed this episode, please do take a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you are willing, please do share the podcast with someone you think might enjoy it as well. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one.